The 1970s wasn't just about Disney. Animation got dark, got banned, and got legendary. One film shocked Japan so badly the negatives had to be smuggled out of the country. Another caused theater walkouts across America. These aren't your Saturday morning cartoons. They're the animated rebels that changed everything. Fritz the Cat, 1972. Fritz the Cat isn't just the first X-rated cartoon. It's the film that burned animation's innocence to the ground. Director Ralph Bakshi dragged viewers through a New York underworld of drugs, violence, and counterculture chaos that made censors lose their minds. Based on R. Crumb's underground comics, Fritz follows a college-age feline through riots, wild parties, and confrontations with pig cops. Literally, pigs as police. Crumb hated the adaptation so much he killed the character in his next comic. The Motion Picture Association slapped it with an X rating, guaranteeing theaters would refuse to show it. Despite being banned in Finland, Italy, and parts of the UK, Fritz raked in $90 million worldwide on a tiny $850,000 budget. That's over 100 times its cost. Theaters that did show it packed houses with crowds who'd never seen animation aimed squarely at adults. Critics were divided. Roger Ebert gave it 4 stars, while others called it a mindless animated destruction derby. Bakshi himself never backed down. "I wasn't interested in just shocking people," he said years later. "I wanted to break animation out of the kiddie ghetto." Whether you think it's brilliant satire or just cheap provocation, Fritz the Cat kicked down doors that animation never fully closed again. Belelladana of Sadness, 1973. Belelladana of Sadness might be the most visually stunning film that almost disappeared forever. This Japanese psychedelic nightmare blends watercolor art with medieval European witch trials, creating something so controversial it bankrupted its studio and vanished for decades. The story follows Jane, a peasant bride who loses everything and makes a deal with the devil. Director Eiichi Yamamoto used barely animated watercolor tableaus that pulse and transform like fever dreams. The violence and imagery was so extreme for 1973 that Japanese censors demanded massive cuts. The studio refused. The film flopped catastrophically in Japan, forcing animation studio Mushi Production into bankruptcy. International distributors wouldn't touch it. For almost 40 years, Belladonna existed only in fragmented bootlegs and film festival legends. Critics who did see it were stunned. Japan's leading film magazine called it animation that denies being animation. In 2016, a restored version finally emerged. Modern critics declared it a masterpiece, a feminist howl against oppression disguised as exploitation. Director Gaspar Noé cited it as a major influence on his controversial film Climax. Allegro Nonropo, 1976. Allegro Nonropo wasn't just banned for controversy, it was almost erased by corporate lawyers. Director Bruno Bozzetto created this Italian answer to Disney's Fantasia that twisted classical music into surreal, often disturbing animated segments that left audiences both laughing and deeply uncomfortable. While Fantasia gave you dancing hippos, Allegro gave you evolutionary satire set to Ravel's Bolero, where a Coca-Cola bottle becomes the catalyst for a planet's doomed civilization. Disney's lawyers immediately tried shutting it down. Screenings were halted across Europe. The film's segment featuring Sibelius's Valse Tristi, showing an elderly cat wandering through the ruins of a demolished home, left test audiences in tears. Another segment featured a snake-like phallus pursuing a woman in an Eden-like garden. Distributors panicked. The Vatican condemned it. Italy's film board demanded cuts that Bozzetto refused. Despite the legal battles, Allegro developed a massive underground following. Midnight screenings in college towns became events. Film professors smuggled copies into universities. Even some Disney animators secretly praised it. "Animation should disturb," Bozzetto said in a rare interview. "If it only comforts, it's just a teddy bear." The film eventually got a limited American release, but with heavy cuts. It wasn't until 2018 that a fully restored version finally appeared. Today, it's celebrated as one of animation's boldest experiments, half parody, half revolutionary art that proved animation could be satirical, melancholy, and provocative all at once. Fantastic Planet, 1973. Fantastic Planet doesn't look controversial at first glance. Its paper cutout animation style seems almost primitive. But this French-Czech science fiction allegory delivered such a blistering critique of Soviet occupation that it was banned throughout the Eastern Bloc and nearly destroyed before completion. Set on a distant planet where giant blue aliens keep humans as pets, the film was an obvious metaphor for Soviet domination of Czechoslovakia. Director René Laloux had to smuggle film reels to France when Soviet tanks literally rolled into Prague during production in 1968. The completed film was immediately banned in Soviet-controlled territories. The imagery gets intense. Humans are casually crushed, experimented on, and treated like vermin. One scene showing human children used as living toys by alien children was cut from most international versions. The hallucinogenic visuals and jazz fusion soundtrack by Alain Goraguer created a viewing experience that felt like a bad acid trip. American distributors had no idea how to market it. Roger Corman's New World Pictures eventually picked it up for midnight screenings, where it became a counterculture hit. Despite censorship, it won the Special Jury Prize at Cannes. Steven Spielberg called it animation that makes you question what it means to be human. Today, it's considered one of the most important animated films ever made, influencing everything from Adult Swim to Guillermo del Toro. The film that nearly didn't survive became animation's most potent political statement, proof that paper cutouts could deliver more impact than Hollywood spectacles. Wizards, 1977. Wizards is the film 20th Century Fox immediately tried to bury. Ralph Bakshi's post-apocalyptic fantasy about technology versus magic seemed like it might be family-friendly, until executives actually watched it. Fairies getting shot by machine guns. Nazi propaganda footage incorporated into animation. A villain named Avatar 2,000 years before James Cameron. Fox initially gave Bakshi $1 million, thinking they were getting a Lord of the Rings-style fantasy. Instead, he delivered a dark allegory about fascism, where a wizard literally uses Hitler's propaganda techniques to build an army. The studio panicked, demanded cuts, then barely promoted it when Bakshi refused. Most controversial was Bakshi's rotoscoping technique, tracing live-action footage over animation, particularly his use of actual Nazi propaganda films. Critics called it disturbingly realistic violence in a cartoon wrapper. Parents' groups across America demanded theaters cancel showings. Many did. Despite minimal marketing, the film developed a cult following so strong that theaters in college towns played it for years. It made $9 million on its tiny budget. Mark Hamill, fresh off Star Wars, declared it one of his favorite voice acting roles ever. George Lucas supposedly watched it 3 times before making Star Wars. Bakshi never compromised. Animation isn't just for kids, he said. That's like saying books should only be Dr. Seuss. Heavy Traffic, 1973. Heavy Traffic was Ralph Bakshi's middle finger to everyone who thought Fritz the Cat was as far as he'd go. This semi-autobiographical journey through 1970s New York street life made Fritz look tame by comparison. Animation and live action collide in a pinball game of violence, racial tension, and urban decay that had theaters refusing to show it. The story follows Michael, a young animator living with his Jewish mother and Italian father in a neighborhood torn apart by racism and crime. Bakshi pulled no punches. Domestic violence, gang warfare, and discrimination, all depicted with brutal honesty. The film constantly shifts between animation and live footage, creating a jarring, documentary-like feel. The MPAA initially refused to give it any rating but X. American Movie Classics banned it from their animation retrospective. Italy, South Africa, and parts of Canada refused classification entirely. Yet critics recognized something revolutionary. The Village Voice called it the taxi driver of animation. Martin Scorsese himself praised its authentic portrayal of New York's darkness. Despite limited distribution, it made $1.5 million on a $400,000 budget and influenced a generation of indie animators. Adult Swim creator Mike Lazo cited it as a direct inspiration. Animation should reflect real life, Bakshi said years later. Even the parts people don't want to see. The film remains challenging even by today's standards. A raw, unfiltered look at urban America that animation rarely attempts. The cartoon that shocked a nation became animation's most honest urban document. Shame of the Jungle, 1975. Shame of the Jungle might be the weirdest film on this list, a French-Belgian animated comedy dubbed into English with the voices of Bill Murray and John Belushi from their Saturday Night Live days. This parody of Tarzan was so outrageous it was banned in France, the country that helped make it. The plot follows Tarzoon, a jungle dweller fighting against Queen Bazonga and her army of giant genital-shaped creatures. Yes, really, the animation is deliberately crude, with character designs that would make Freud need therapy. Director Picha claimed it was satire targeting colonialism and Western attitudes toward Africa, but critics weren't convinced. American distributors cut nearly 20 minutes of the most extreme material, but it still earned an X rating. Several states banned it outright. The National Organization for Women picketed screenings in New York. Even with the cuts, critics were brutal. The New York Times called it animation at its most aggressively juvenile. Against all odds, it developed a following on college campuses and late-night screenings. It made almost $2 million despite playing on fewer than 50 screens nationwide. John Belushi supposedly recorded his lines while completely intoxicated, creating a weird energy that added to the film's cult status. Watership Down, 1978. Watership Down is the trauma that an entire generation of children never recovered from. This British animated film about rabbits seeking a new home looks like a children's movie. It is not. It's a brutal survival story featuring rabbit fascism, graphic violence, and existential terror that was somehow marketed to families. Based on Richard Adams' novel, the film follows rabbits fleeing their doomed warren. Director Martin Rosen refused to tone down the book's intensity. Rabbits are shown being gassed, caught in snares with visible blood, and tearing each other apart. The warren destruction scene traumatized countless children who expected something like Bambi. The BBFC gave it a U rating in Britain, meaning suitable for all ages, a decision they later admitted was a serious mistake. Parents stormed out of theaters with crying children. Several UK councils tried banning it from local cinemas. British newspapers ran editorials questioning whether animation should be subject to stricter ratings. Despite the controversy, it was a financial success, earning over $4 million worldwide. Critics recognized its artistry even while questioning its marketing. The New York Times called it animation that respects its audience enough to show nature's true face. The film's reputation has only grown stronger with time. Director Guillermo del Toro cited it as a major influence on his approach to fantasy. In 2018, the BBFC finally reclassified it as PG, admitting the original rating was inappropriate. The children's film that wasn't a children's film became one of animation's most respected achievements and most notorious traumas. Dirty Duck, 1974. Dirty Duck might be the most obscene animated film ever made by a major studio. This New World Pictures release combined underground comics aesthetics with jazz fusion music for 70 minutes of content so extreme that the MPAA created the X rating partly in response to it. The plot barely matters. A repressed office worker meets a foul-mouthed duck who drags him through a series of increasingly bizarre adventures. Director Charles Swenson began the film with producer Roger Corman, who withdrew after seeing early footage. "Too extreme even for me," Corman reportedly said. That's saying something. The film features graphic scenes that can't be described here. Most theaters refuse to show it. Those that did often cut it off mid-screening when managers realized what was playing. Chicago and Boston banned it outright. The few critics who reviewed it were stunned. Variety called it animation that makes Ralph Bakshi look like Walt Disney. Despite the controversy, it developed a following in midnight screenings. Musician Frank Zappa was such a fan, he hired Swenson to create animation for his concert films. The film even won an award at a small animation festival in France, where the jury called it deliberately and proudly offensive art. For decades, it was nearly impossible to find. No VHS release, no DVD, nothing but blurry bootlegs. Metamorphoses, 1978. Metamorphoses was marketed as educational mythology, but delivered something closer to an animated fever dream. Director Takashi Masunaga adapted Ovid's classic tales into a series of disturbing transformations that had American educators demanding the film be pulled from school libraries. Unlike traditional animation, Metamorphoses used a realistic art style for its Greek myths, and didn't shy away from their disturbing elements. The story of Apollo and Daphne shows her literally transforming into a tree while fleeing assault. Actaeon's transformation into a stag and subsequent mauling by his own dogs was shown in graphic detail. Japan's Toei Animation produced it as their first serious adult animation export to America, but the reception was disastrous. The MPAA gave it a PG rating despite content that would earn an R today. Schools that purchased it based on its educational marketing were horrified. Tennessee banned it from public schools entirely. Library associations removed it from circulation. Despite the controversy, animation historians consider it groundbreaking. The Metamorphosis sequences influenced films from The Thing to An American Werewolf in London. Director Guillermo del Toro called it animation that understood body horror before live action did. The film disappeared from distribution for decades before resurfacing on specialty streaming services. Modern viewers are stunned by its technical achievements and still disturbed by its unflinching approach to mythology's darker elements. What was meant as education became one of animation's most notorious cult items. The 1970s broke animation wide open, pushing boundaries that even today's adult cartoons rarely touch. These films weren't just controversial, they were revolutionary acts of artistic rebellion. Which of these banned animations shocked you most? Did any of them go too far? Or is animation still too restricted by outdated ideas about what cartoons should be? The most dangerous art is the kind that makes us uncomfortable. And these animated rebels are still making waves decades later.